This morning during our, I forgot to turn that on. This morning during our Bible class hour, we took some time to talk about appearance and manner when approaching a door during door knocking. But we ran out of time in talking about what to actually say, and so I do want to cover that tonight. And if you will, go ahead and turn to John chapter 4. We already looked at this text a couple of Sundays ago. John chapter 4. We took a look at this passage for a couple weeks in a row, and Jesus' interactions with the Samaritan woman at the well in Sychar. And we made several observations. We're not going to go back through all of those things, but I do want to just kind of bring these things back to our attention and highlight a few key points here. John chapter 4 starts in verse 7. A woman of Samaria came to drink water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink," for his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. Therefore the Samaritan woman said to him, "How do you, being a Jew, ask for a drink from me, being a Samaritan woman?" For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. Jesus answered and said to her, "If you knew the gift of God, and who it is who says to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." She said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where then do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this well and drank of it himself and his sons and his cattle?" And Jesus answered and said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will thirst again. But whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never thirst, ever. But the water that I will give him will become in him a well of water springing up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water, so that I will not be thirsty, nor come back here to draw." And he said to her, "Go, call your husband and come back here." The woman answered and said, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You've correctly said, I have no husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you now have is not your husband. This you've said truly." The woman said to him, "Sir, I see that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, and you people say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, an hour is coming when neither in this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But an hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For such people the Father seeks to be his worshipers. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." The woman said to him, "I know that Messiah is coming," he is called Christ, "and when he comes, he will declare all things to us." Jesus said to her, "I who speak to you am he." At this point his disciples came, and they were marveling that he was speaking with a woman, yet no one said, "What do you seek?" or "Why are you speaking with her?" So the woman left her water jar, went into the city, and said to the men, "Come, see a man who told me all the things that I have done. Is this not the Christ?" We're going to cut it off there. The story just goes on, and the people come and they believe in Jesus too. And like I said, hopefully reading back through this jars your memory a little bit. You remember some of the things that we talked about, that we discussed, the lessons in how Jesus interacts with her. And I really want to highlight 3 things before we move on in this lesson. There are 3 things I think that are just really critical. The first one is that he started with a normal conversation. He starts by just asking her for a drink of water. He does not start off by saying, "I'm the Messiah, believe in me." He doesn't even mention the Messiah until she brings him up in verse 25. Okay? They have some conversation that builds up to that point. They have a normal conversation, and eventually they get there. That's the first item. The second, he's not the only one talking here. He lets her talk too. He isn't monologuing. He gives her a chance to respond, and they're having a dialogue, right? That's the difference between a monologue, one person talking, and a dialogue, two people talking. Okay, we want to have a dialogue. We want to have a back and forth where interest builds up in people so that we can get to the important parts, which is the third item. He redirects her questions with his own questions. He redirects the conversation in a spiritual direction without being antagonistic. It's not that he shies away from controversy, but he isn't antagonistic about any of this. They're just having a conversation. It seems to go pretty comfortably, pretty smoothly, but he's still moving in a particular direction. He's not just having this conversation to talk about water and the virtues of some types of water over other types of water. That's not the kind of conversation Jesus wants to have. He wants to get into spiritual things, and so he finds a way to take the conversation in that direction. Now, Jesus is moving at a very accelerated rate. Sychar was not his target. He was passing through the city of Sychar on his way to Galilee. He's not planning to come back and visit this woman in a month's time and follow up on this conversation, have a great deal, more interactions with her. This is it, as far as we can see. It says that they ask, the people in the city asked him to stay for a little longer, and in verse 40 it says he stayed with them 2 more days. So, that's it. I don't know how much he interacted with her again during those 2 days, but this is it. He's got a pretty short time frame, and even though he's moving very quickly, he still takes the time to put these 3 principles into play. Now, we have more time on our hands. Not that we can just dilly-dally, but we have more time on our hands. We live here in this city. We're still going to be living here in a few weeks, Lord willing. And we have the ability to do this follow. And so we can take a little bit more, a little bit slower, or a more paced process. Jesus isn't trying to build up a friendship with this woman that's going to develop into something else. We can take the time to do that with people. But even I just want to emphasize this, even when he is moving very quickly, he still puts those rules into play. The reason I'm saying this is if you ignore everything else that we talk about, you miss everything else. At least take that into consideration. If nothing else, because that's exactly how we see Jesus do it. Those are really essential. So I want to go ahead and put that there. I also want to point out that in this conversation, I don't know if this is the entirety of their conversation. They may have said other things as well. They didn't say less than this, but they may have said more than this. But this is all we get. Even so, what we have here, this was more than a 30-second interchange. They're having a real conversation. It takes some time for her to build up interest. When he starts off, she really doesn't sound very interested. She doesn't sound like she believes him, or that she's interested in what he's supposedly selling. Like, oh, you've got this living water, right? Sure you do. I've heard that one before. I don't know. Maybe that was the snake oil of their day. Would you like to buy some living water? It doesn't. To me, it doesn't. It really doesn't read like she believes him until she gets down into verse 19 when she says, "I see that you're a prophet." So it takes some time for him to build up rapport with her so that she's willing to believe. If you come to the door and you start a conversation with someone, and you're 15 seconds in, you're trying to build a conversation that goes in a spiritual direction, but it's going to take more than 15 seconds. It's probably going to take at least 2 to 3 minutes before you really have their attention and can expect to see any kind of success. So you want to have an interchange here. But also remember, we're not necessarily trying to convert anyone right there at the door. I mean, if you can get a study right there at the door, that's awesome. And that does sometimes happen. But very, very rarely. And it definitely doesn't happen by just knocking and starting off by asking, which I've said ad nauseum. But we are trying to reach as many people as possible. I think I've mentioned before that if you look at the Apostle Paul in Acts chapter 16, when he comes into Greece for the first time, he has the chance to speak the gospel to people who have never, ever heard it before. No one has brought the gospel to Greece at that point in time, in Acts chapter 16. And he comes in, and he hits the big cities and skips over the smaller ones, because he's trying to hit approach as many people as possible. He's trying to use his time efficiently, because there's a lot of people that need to hear the word, and Paul only has so much time. That, in a different sense, that's still true of us. We only have so much time, and we are still trying to get out to everyone. So spend time with people, but don't let one person take an hour and a half when you're not getting any further. You're trying to plant, get their contact information, make landfall with them, so that you can come back later and continue the conversation. But you're trying to initiate as many as possible. So once you've done that, you've started this conversation, you've moved it in a spiritual direction, you've gotten their name, address, etc., prayer request, you've prayed with them, say thank you, and move on. Go to the next door. Now, that being said, I understand not everyone is going to be available to have a long discussion. If you see someone is in the middle of mowing the lawn, they want to finish mowing the lawn. If you see someone climbing into their vehicle to go and buy some charcoal so that they can make some good barbecue for lunch, that is not the time to talk to them. Write down their address, wait maybe an hour or so, come back. You still want to talk to them. Don't just leave materials and move on. Come back so you can talk to them, and circle back around, and wait until you have the time to interface with them. Now, sometimes someone will come to the door, and you can see that they're clearly preoccupied. Ask them, same thing. Ask them if they would be okay with you coming back, and if so, then go ahead and take down their information. In the other situations, don't ask, just come back there. Don't even worry about it, just come back. But if you have the chance to see them and talk to them, ask if you can come back. If they say, no, I'm not interested at all right, thank you. But if you can, if they're willing to, and they express some interest, then you have that opportunity. So, obviously some people are just not going to be interested at all. But if it's just a timing thing, don't let timing prevent someone from having a chance to hear the gospel. Okay, now, what is it that you actually want to say? Well, it's probably a good idea to start off with a basic introduction of who you are. Now, I have no idea who I'm going to be teamed up with, so I don't have anyone. But if I were Frank and I were going around, let's say it's me and Frank and Marilyn, they're going around. Frank might say, knock on the door. Hi, I'm Frank Helvey. This is my wife Marilyn, and we're Christians from here in Hondo. You can say that, or you can say we're with the Hondo Church of Christ, and we're going around today to meet people and get to know our community a little better. That's it. That's all it takes. Just introduce yourself. And then you can roll into the next part. You want to look around. Craig mentioned that this morning. You want to look around, see what it is that you can discuss or talk about. Now, if you look at Acts chapter 17, I wanted to have more examples because there are several examples in the New Testament. But these are the main ones that I could think of. In Acts chapter 17, verse 16, Acts 17, verse 16, it says that while Paul was waiting for Timothy and Silas at Athens, his spirit was being provoked within him as he was observing the city full of idols. So this is Paul's first time in the city of Athens. He's never been here before, and he's here by himself. Silas and Timothy they're taking the long way around, and so they haven't arrived yet. So he's here all by himself. And he's looking around and he sees these idols everywhere. I mean, there's just so much paganism. And in verse 17 and 18, you see that he's doing his best to reason with people in the synagogue, in the marketplace, out everywhere where he sees folks. And some of the pagan philosophers of verse 18 take him to the Areopagus, or to Mars Hill, verse 19, saying, "May we know what this strange teaching is which you're speaking." So they bring Paul to this opportunity. They already know what he's going to talk about. But he still starts off this way in verse 22. Paul stood in the middle of the Areopagus. Think it's just like a big forum, a big open square. Paul stood in the middle of the Areopagus and said, "Men of Athens, I observe that you are very religious or superstitious in all respects. While I was passing through, examining the objects of your worship, I also found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' Therefore, what you worship in ignorance, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the earth and all things in it, since he's Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor is he served with human hands, though he need anything." Then he just keeps going into the rest of his sermon. I'm not going to read his whole sermon. I just want to focus on that start right there. He looks around. He is able, by the powers of observation, to see what kind of people there are. He's able to pick up this information, and he leads with that. He says, "Oh, this is very valuable. It's very valuable because I can see they're religious. I can see they definitely don't know anything about the Lord. I can see that they don't feel confident that they know everything there is to know. I mean, they have an altar that says to an unknown God. In other words, they feel like they've missed something. They don't feel like they have all the knowledge that they're supposed to have. And Paul's able to use that and say, "You're right. You don't have all the knowledge you need to have. You don't know about the one true God." And he's able to go into that. So, I mean, we're trying to do the same thing. Maybe not quite as eloquently as Paul does, and maybe it's not very likely that you're going to see an altar in someone's yard that says, "To an unknown God" on it. If you do, then feel free to just quote this whole thing from memory. I would be very impressed if one of y'all did that. That'd be a great story. But chances are that's not going to be the case, and you'll have to think through these things in your own head. When you go and you walk up someone's yard, people decorate their yards a lot. Not everyone does, but it's a little bit of an American thing. We like to put things up that showcase our personality. Excuse me. Covered my mouth the wrong direction. Anyway, there could be all sorts of things that you can notice. And I pulled this list from some of Rob's material, and I came up with short things that I might say if I notice these things. He had a couple of these. One of the examples he likes to give, because again, this is very common in America, especially here in Texas. You'll see flags everywhere. You'll see national flags, you'll see state flags, you'll see You may see political flags of some kind. And, it'll tell you something that, most likely these people are patriotic. They care, at least in some way, about our country. And you can use that to kind of launch into a discussion. Hey, I saw these flags, and I really care about our country too. And it's sad to see all the strife that's happening. And if you haven't noticed, we're getting very close to the election, so people are thinking about these things. It's a very natural subject to bring up. Craig mentioned this morning, that's probably not the right time to talk about how you want to vote or how they should vote. But it is, you can still have a conversation without going too much into those kinds of details. You may notice that they have pets. I'm not a big pet person. I never have been. But if I see that they've got some pet, people love to talk about their pets. And I can say, look, I got a cat for the first time, and I'm learning so much, and I just can't figure out how to discipline that cat. Oh, she will not listen to a thing I tell her. Just earlier today, I was sitting at my kitchen table, and I hear her playing with the blinds upstairs. And I know she knows her name because when I call out her name, she comes around and she just looks at me. Then she runs back and does it again, right? Okay, that very lighthearted, doesn't have to be anything difficult. Sports, oh man, great time to talk about sports. Can you believe the Bama upset last weekend? It was yesterday, but next week it will have been last weekend. Hey, there you go. It's Texas. Everyone likes to talk about sports. You see any kind of college football affiliation, you've got a conversation to talk about. Oh, I saw the A&M pennant or the A&M decal on your truck. I actually went to A&M. I'm a proud Aggie myself. There you go. You got something to talk about. I don't know. Maybe they have a cool car in their yard. Talk about their car. I'm not a car person. All cars look the same to me as long as it runs. Maybe they have a really lovely garden. I have been trying to grow hydrangeas for years, and mine just don't look nearly as lovely as yours do. You got the perfect color ratio of pinks to blues. I wish I could do that. Wouldn't that be amazing? How do you get your soil pH just perfect like that? Maybe you're a plant person. You see, it's very common to see bicycles or other slide kids' toys or playthings out in the yard. I have nothing to say about that because I don't know how to talk to people about their kids. Maybe you can talk about your kids or grandkids or great-grandkids, as the case may be. But really, this kind of gets us into this basic principle that people like to talk about themselves. People like to tell stories about themselves. They like to feel that people like to feel human. Sometimes we feel like ants. People don't like to feel like ants. They like to feel like people. And when you show up and you treat people like people, and you show them care and love and concern, and you just establish a connection, that does a world of good. So give people a chance to talk. Don't monologue. And then once the conversation's gone on for a minute or two, maybe 3 minutes, you need to be transitioning that conversation in a direction, right? Jesus was not going around being a great conversationalist because he just enjoyed, he wasn't a comedian. He was going around making connections with people because he had a goal. He had a purpose in mind. And he was very serious about that purpose. And we should be too. So, at some point they transition into a spiritual focus. And there are 4 really easy directions that you can take this, some of which we've kind of generated. And it could be that however you were able to begin the conversation just really smoothly and naturally develops. But if not, you can just, be like, well, we're here today. Just remind them, we're here because, one of these 4 things. The first one are the house-to-house mailers. I had one sitting around here. I don't need to show you. You know what they look like. They've been sitting out on the table in the foyer for several months now. But we've been mailing these to everybody whose door we're going to be knocking. They've been receiving these for 3 months. Now, that doesn't mean they've read them, but they've been receiving them. And we'll have some for you to wave around. And hey, we've been sending these for a few months now, and we wanted to see how you've been enjoying them. Have you had a chance to read these? And they'll respond in some way. Oh, yes, I've been really enjoying them. Oh, what have you enjoyed about them? Well, I read this article that I thought was very meaningful. Or they may say, no, I've been receiving those, but I didn't know it was, so I haven't been reading. I've just been throwing them away. Well, that's all right. Here, let me give you a replacement. And, let me explain a little bit about this. We've got some articles in here, and it will tell you a little information about us. And, it's free. We're sending it out because we want to encourage you and lift you up. There you go. You've had a conversation. Now, the second one is almost impossible to say no to. People love this one. Now, some people will just say no. Some people actually get offended at this one, but most people don't. Is we're going around and we wanted to see how we can pray for you. Is there any, if not you, maybe a relative or a friend or somebody you know, a neighbor, is there anybody that we can pray for? And you take the request, you're going to write all these things down, get their contact information. That's always what we're trying to do. We're trying to get their contact information, and you can pray with them right then and there. You pray with them, and you ask, can we add them to our prayer list? We would like to pray for them as a congregation. We're going to do that. We're going to pray for them as a congregation. We don't know these people. We're getting to know these people. And the third, you can follow right along, after that, the request for prayer, or you can do this all by itself. Hey, we like to write cards of encouragement. We talked about that this morning. We like to write these cards of encouragement. Can we take down your name and address so we can send you some cards? Could we do that? And if you've already asked about prayers, that'll follow naturally. But do you know anyone else who's going through a tough time? We'd like to send them some cards. You can do that as well. And then, of course, the fourth one. Hey, if you're available tomorrow, we have a lecture series going. You can call it a gospel meeting, but nobody knows what a gospel meeting is. So if you want people to know what you're talking about, you can call it a lecture series or a series of lessons, something like that. Or you can say gospel meeting and explain it, but people are not likely to know what that term refers to. We've got a special lecture series discussing God's eternal kingdom, and we would just love for you to come and join us. And there's gonna be a potluck in the after the first lesson, and maybe they'll express interest, maybe they won't. But now listen, if they say, I would love to come, but I can't drive, I don't have a car, let them know. We will make sure they get here. We will give them a ride. Whatever it takes, we will make sure that they get here. We're not going to let anybody not come to church because of something trivial like that, where they just don't have the ability to travel themselves. Now, if they can't get out of the house, that's a different matter. But Excuse me. But if they just don't have a car, they can't drive. We're not going to let that be a problem. Okay. Now, I want to close with 3 passages, because we're doing all this training, we're doing all this discussion, because we want for this to be successful. And by successful, what we mean is that we come away with a list of contacts. What we mean is that we take those contacts and we reach out to these people, and eventually we see them blossom into Bible studies and baptisms and growth in the church. That's what we mean. And that's what we think of. And yes, that is definitely a quantifiable measure of growth. And that is, in fact, our goal. But you are also going to have some people close the door in your face. You're going to have some people who might yell at you. You're going to have some people who just aren't interested. And that is discouraging. And I'm not going to sugarcoat that. It is very discouraging when that happens. And sometimes it can be hard to tread your feet onto the next house. I just want to give you 3 verses to help provide a little bit more encouragement for when that happens. The first one, and I know there's a context to this, but it's still applicable. In 1 Samuel chapter 8. In 1 Samuel chapter 8, that's where the children of Israel approach Samuel the prophet and say, "You were a good leader, but your sons are terrible. And we're sick of them. And we want a king. We're done. We're done with this. We want a king." And there's a certain amount of validity to their issues with Samuel's sons. That they weren't good men. They weren't good leaders. But God had given them a system that didn't require a king. They had priests. They had prophets. They had judges. They already had leaders. But they weren't satisfied with that. They wanted a king so that they could be like the other nations who were around them. And Samuel was taking this very personally, and he prayed to God, and he said, "I don't know what to do about this. I don't have any idea how I should handle this." And in verse 7, the Lord said to Samuel, "Listen to the voice of the people in regard to all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they've rejected me from being king over them." God gives people free will for a reason, and God will respect that decision. Doesn't mean things are going to turn out nicely if people choose to reject God. But God gives everybody a choice, and He will honor and respect that choice. And we shouldn't feel insulted or hurt because of it. And I think it's natural that we should be that we're going to feel disappointed. And we're going to feel sad because we know where the broad way leads to. But God wants us to know that it's not something for us to take personally. Everyone is going to be held responsible for their own decisions. Okay, that's the first one. The second one is the command itself. The reason why it can feel so discouraging is because we feel like we have failed. Now, in Matthew 28, 19, 20, Jesus said, "Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to keep all that I commanded you. Behold, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age." And we feel like if we don't get to the baptizing, then we failed. But that wasn't the only part. There's also a command in there to go. There's also a command to make disciples. There's also a command to teach. And we may not be able to hit each one of those items, but each of those is part of this command. And by going out And by presenting the gospel, we are still fulfilling our responsibility in this command. And then, of course, 1 Corinthians 3, verses 5 and 6, where Paul looks back. He's talking to the Corinthians. And the Corinthians some of them are getting very excited about Paul or about Apollos or Peter, because they really look up to these men. And, I think in a sense we all do too, because we look at them as great Christians and as, man, I want to be like Paul. And even Paul said, imitate me as I imitate Christ. But we're not imitating Paul for the sake of imitating Paul. We're not imitating Peter for the sake of imitating Peter. And when they went to the Corinthians and they gave them the gospel, that was all they were doing. Our words do not have the ability to save anyone. Our words have the ability to bring the gospel to people, but our words save nobody. The gospel is the power of God unto salvation. Romans 1:16. Not our words. If our words bring the gospel to people, which is all we're trying to do, then we've succeeded in what we were trying to do. What then is Apollos and what is Paul? Servants through whom you believe. Even as the Lord gave to each one, I planted and Apollos watered, but God was causing the growth. The Holy Spirit is going to do his job. The gospel is powerful enough. Our job is to present the message. And so, I don't know exactly how everything is going to go. I don't know who's going to have the most results or whatever. But don't think about it as a personal thing. We're doing our job as the church and as the servants of the Lord because he's the one who's actually doing the work. We're just helpers. So, I hope this filled in some of the gaps, and I hope this gives you a feeling of reassurance at least in knowing what to say and how to interact with people this Saturday. And really, these things are true even when you're just talking to people that you meet at Walmart or H-E-B, wherever you go. But throughout this week, keep the efforts in your prayers, the door knocking, the gospel meeting, all of those things, and I'm really looking forward to this. I'm very excited to see how this all goes. If you have any need for encouragement yourself, or anything that you feel like you need to work on, you've looked in God's Word and you've seen that your life isn't matching up the way it should, whatever the case is, we are here to encourage you, to pray for you, and to build you up. If you need anything, please come. We stand and sing.